Welcome to Congregation Sherith Israel, and welcome to our conversation tonight. I'm Rabbi Jessica Graf, the senior rabbi here, joined by two extraordinary thinkers and leaders in the community who are going to teach us tonight, and Shimrit will introduce them in just a moment. I want to let you know that this has been our way of existing, especially in this last year and a half, when Israel has been front and center in our minds, that we have invited people to come together to listen, to struggle, to wrestle, to disagree, to discuss, to agree sometimes. And all of those things are very important to us because it means that we're engaging in a very valuable conversation. So I hope that you will hear things tonight that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Then you're learning and you're thinking. And that's the idea. If we only heard things that we already believed, well, what would be the point? So here we are tonight to engage each other. As our speakers are in conversation, there will be index cards and pencils that will go around. If anybody has a question, please feel free to write it down, and they will be collected by Shimrit, by Rabbi Strauss, by some other members of our staff who are walking around, and those questions will make their way up here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Shimrit Brown-Kameen, who is the Northwest Regional Director of J Street and brings us this program tonight. Thank you so much, Shimrit.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jessica. It's such a pleasure to be here in your community, and thank you for being such a wonderful ally for our work. Really appreciate being here. And thank you for all of you for coming here tonight. It's really great to see so many familiar and also new faces. And I think it's very meaningful to gather today at this moment that we're all experiencing so much worries and difficulties on both sides of the ocean. So first of all, I want to extend special thanks to Sherith Israel, to Rabbi Jessica, and to Peter, and to the entire incredible Sherith Israel team for making this event happen. And I also want to say thank you. It's a true community effort, and this event is co-sponsored by Congregation Emmanuel and the JCC of San Francisco, and the Kitchen, and Shar Zahav. And we are also excited to have here in the room several J Street leaders and board members. If you can raise your hand so people can see you. That's great. And I have in the room also my wonderful colleagues from J Street, Casey and Daniel and Rabbi Andy Strauss. If you can raise your hands so people can see you too. These are the best people. Yeah. If you have any questions about our work after the program, they're the best people to go and ask questions. And I really want to start by, first of all, for those who don't know me, my name is Shimrit Brown-Kameen. I'm the Northwest Regional Director for J Street. And before that, I worked for 7.5 years at the New Israel Fund. And some of you also know me from the Unacceptable Rallies and the Rallies for Peace. And I want to acknowledge that this moment is, as I said, very difficult. I have my entire family in Israel running in and out of shelters since last Thursday. And we really don't know how things are unfolding. And alongside that, we know that the war in Gaza is continued, and the horrors from there are continued with great worry about innocent people in Gaza and about the fate of the hostages, and also the growing annexation in the West Bank. And we didn't even start talking about the situation here and the attack on democracy here on our homeland in California. So this is why I'm especially grateful that we can gather here as a community and process together and have an opportunity to really reflect on the moment and to talk about our role. And talking about active role, I want to say a few words about J Street. For those of you who are not familiar with us, J Street is the home for pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy people. I think until up for a little bit more than 15 years ago, The only conversation in the Jewish community was with one voice of one body that aimed to represent all of us, and every one of us, any one of us who felt that they feel a little different, that they are not necessarily agree with what the Israeli government is doing, felt isolated. And the fact that now there is a conversation and we allow ourselves to ask in questions and to bring a different discussion into the community, it's really important. And I think that it comes out of deep love for Israel and for the commitment of a liberal democratic Israel. So I really appreciate you, Tal and Jeremy, for being here today. That's so great to have you. And I just want to introduce them and say a few words about them, and then you can dive into your conversation. So Jeremy Ben-Ami is the president of J Street. His political resume includes serving in the mid-1990s as the deputy domestic policy advisor in the White House with President Clinton, and working for 7 presidential and numerous states and local campaigns. He was Howard Dean's national policy director in 2004 and helped manage a mayoral campaign in New York City in 2001. He was chosen by American Weekly Jewish newspaper, The Forward, for 3 years as part of the Forward 50, the compilation of most influential Jewish Americans, and there is so much more, but you'll hear from Jeremy because his resume goes really long. And Tal Shalev is a chief political correspondent and analytical for Walla News, a leading news outlet in Israel that provides independent breaking news and analytics 24 hours a day. She covers Israel's prime minister, government, parliament, and political developments. Tal has over 15 years of extended variety of rich career in journalism, including working in Haaretz newspaper and I-24 News, and regularly appears on TV and radio providing commentary. So, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I'll pass it to Rabbi Jessica to start the conversation. Thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight.
So when we invited you to come here, there was lots to talk about. And now, given this past few days, there's so much more to talk about. Let's begin by hearing your thoughts on the current situation. How is this impacting you, your family? What might you tell us as insiders into this conversation?
So, hi everyone. I'm happy to be here. A headline that I always give to whenever I speak about Israeli politics is it's complicated. It's always true, and I think that kind of also sums up how the way I feel and the way it is to experience such a war from afar. I feel in some aspects it's a bit scarier to be here than to be in Israel, or at least from my experience. When you're, well, there's a song in Hebrew that says, in the end, you get used to everything. So we have gotten used in the past year and a half to a constant state of war. And when you are running in and out of shelters, you're in a survival mode. You don't necessarily notice what's going on. You're just like thinking about how you're going to get, how many hours of sleep you're going to get, and is everyone safe? And when you see it from afar and you experience it from afar, it's very, I feel like it's much scarier in a way, because I can really look at what's going on, and it seems like a mess. Everything is so chaotic. So when you see the chaos from the outside, it's a bit scarier. Everyone is fine in my family, thank you. But I think this catches me, and we have several identities. So as a journalist, I have a lot of questions that I am asking about what's happening, and a lot of unanswered questions. But as an Israeli, I think it's important that I kind of explain where the Israeli psyche is right now at this moment. October 7th totally shattered Israel's self-esteem and image as a superpower in the region. And this is an essential part of the Israeli identity, is that we are strong, that we have a strong army, and that no one can defeat us. And since then, any military success, and we have had some military successes. Some have been very impressive, vis-a-vis the Beeper operation in Lebanon in September, and at least the opening act of this operation in Iran seemed to be very successful. So the initial response is just a lot of patriotism and kind of restoring that shattered self-esteem. So the initial response in Israel to this situation was, I think, pride in the impressive capabilities that suddenly the IDF, which just a year and 8 months ago collapsed, suddenly look what we are doing and what we're doing to Iran. And another thing that is very strong since October 7th, the feeling is that you cannot wait and see what happens when enemies threaten to destroy you. And you cannot overlook. And if someone says that he wants to destroy you or annihilate you, you should take them by their word. So that is one of the reasons that this war, which is an initiated war, Israel rarely initiates wars. This war is widely in the consensus at the moment, even though it has brought severe damage and severe attacks, and it's been almost a week that Israel has basically been under a barrage of rockets, and this is the real deal. I mean, this is nothing compared to what we experienced in the past year and 8 months from Lebanon or from Gaza or from the Houthim. This is a totally different scale of attacks and of damage, but still the initial feeling that I can sense from abroad is that people are willing to contain it at the moment. And there's a widespread consensus in the political system. Everyone is backing Netanyahu at the moment. And that, of course, depends how long that feeling will prevail, really depends on how this ends. If this ends in a total disaster and there is no end game, nobody knows what the end game is. It does depend on what is going to happen with President Trump. Basically, the whole game now, the whole war depends on President Trump. And Netanyahu did take a gamble, not knowing if President Trump is going to join this attack. So I think at the moment, the feeling in Israel is that this is a necessary war, but that feeling can change very quickly if this war turns out to be a disaster.
So I don't have a whole lot to add to Tal, because I think she's given you a good sense of the situation in Israel. What I would say from the U.S. perspective, and speaking for J Street, I think there's a very broad consensus in the American Jewish community of an understanding of Iran as a threat and as a bad actor. I think that that's a relatively widely shared view, and I think the consensus extends to the idea that Iran should not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So I think there is a consensus covering a fairly broad part of the Jewish community on that, and that covers the political spectrum as well. The distinction and the debate has been over the means of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon, and there is a strong part of the American political system and a strong part of the American Jewish community that doesn't believe that a military attack is the way to go about it, but that a diplomatic agreement, such as the one that President Obama reached in 2015, is the more effective and permanent way, with a lot less cost and damage, of containing Iran's nuclear program, putting it under a close watch from international monitors and very clear sanctions on Iran if it doesn't comply. And that's where J Street falls. J Street has always been in the pro-diplomacy camp. We've always felt that was the better way to go. We've said military force should not be off the table, but it should be the last resort. And so in this case, this seems to have been a decision, an optional decision of choice by the Israeli government to upend negotiations that were still ongoing. And so we have a very serious question about whether or not that was the wise decision at that moment. The tactical success of these last 4 or 5 days is impressive from a, just operational point of view, but often tactical success doesn't necessarily lead to strategic success. And the absence of a clear end game, the absence of knowing, well, what is the United States going to do? How is Iran going to react? Are they going to take a retaliatory step that will then require the U.S. to get even more deeply involved? Will they attack a neighbor and bring a neighbor into the fight? These are things that we don't know, and escalation and the cycle of violence can get out of control quickly. And so I think it's too early to judge. J Street is essentially asking a lot of these questions and saying certainly before the United States acts, if it's going to take military action, Congress needs to vote. You need to have an authorization of war. You need to have an authorization for the use of military force. And so we're going to back the congressional resolutions that have been introduced in the last 24 hours. I'm afraid they don't come to a vote till next week, and I suspect that the action that Trump will take will be in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I think, you know, the cycle may not catch up to what's actually going to happen.
So how does this situation with Iran change the last year and 8 months of how you've been feeling about what's going on in the Middle East, Israel's actions? Now we have war on many fronts. What do you make of this?
Sure. It's complicated. I can just answer that any question you ask, and it'll be totally correct. So first of all, it's been a year and 8 months of the war in Gaza. It's important to note that most of the Israeli public would want that war to be over. Various polls show that 60 to 70% of Israelis would support a deal that would end the war in exchange for returning the hostages. And the government has been prolonging, and Netanyahu and his government has been prolonging this war Netanyahu from his political reasons, his partners have their ideological reasons, but basically they have prolonging this war against where the Israeli public is. Now, in the first glance, this attack on Iran, this Iran war, it seems like bad news for the hostages because A, it puts the Gaza war like nobody's looking at Gaza, who knows what's going on there right now. We do know from testimonies from some of the hostages that returned that when there is war, and I guess Iran is similar to having a war in Gaza, then they get treated worsely by their Hamas captives. And nobody's talking about the hostages. The news basically is, the news cycle right now in Israel is just like running from one barrage to another, from one barrage in Tel Aviv to an attack in Tehran, and there's no discourse about the hostages. That being said, I do hope and do think that this eventually could bring the war in Gaza closer to its end. Because one of the reasons that Netanyahu has been prolonging this war is that he's been wanting to run away from the 7th of October. The 7th of October is a disaster that will always be on his name, but Netanyahu wants to reach the next election with a different story to tell. And the attack on Iran, which I've been covering Netanyahu for 15 years, everyone knows this is his thing. It gives him a story to tell. And it's a story strong enough that he can tell and perhaps put aside it's a total victory in the end. This is a total victory he can sell to his electoral base, unlike Gaza, which will never reach a total victory. So I do hope that there can be some kind of linkage between the two. This is, of course, depends on the American president. But if President Trump knows how to link these two things, this could bring the war in Gaza closer to an end, because one of the reasons, well, the main reason Netanyahu doesn't want to end the war in Gaza is because his coalition will fall apart because his far-right partners will leave the coalition. Well, now he can go to elections. He can have them leave, and he will still be very dominant in the election. On the contrary, this attack might have opened up a new gate from Netanyahu's electoral point of view, he can perhaps use it to stir back to the center and try to get back some of the more centrist votes in the next elections. And in that respect, it will also be good for him to return the hostages. So this might all be a lot of wishful thinking. And some of these things, when we plan about both Netanyahu and Trump, they're not predictable in any way. But at large, at least from Netanyahu's political point of view, he now has the political capital he needs for the next election, which means that perhaps he can abandon the Gaza war.
It's an interesting perspective on the combination.
Yeah, I mean, the J Street perspective on Gaza starts, of course, the same way with Iran. There's a understanding of the horror of October 7th. We know so many people in the J Street community was very close to people who were affected by October 7th. We always begin the story in a place of compassion and sharing of emotions with Israelis. And it's the same with the Iran situation. We understand the threat, but we part ways then over what comes next. What has happened in Gaza over the course of the last 19 months defies our imagination in terms of just how awful it is as a moral calamity, as a strategic disaster. This has cost Israel so much in terms of the world's support. It certainly within the American Jewish community has cost support within not just the Democratic Party, it's showing erosion in the Republican Party. This has been a very, very strategically damaging war that has been perpetuated for 19 months, largely because of the political agenda of the Prime Minister. What has happened in the last 4 to 5 days shifts attention away from that. Every day, still over the last 4 or 5 days, dozens and dozens of people are being killed at these aid distribution sites that don't make a whole lot of sense, that are the result of an inhumane policy of shutting down the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza for several months, and now not allowing in the people who actually know how to distribute the aid, and trying to do it through private contractors with American security companies. So, part of the complexity of this moment is that you have one war going on where there's people running to shelters and you want to stand with your friends and your family and our staff and our colleagues in Israel. And at the same time, while that is happening, there's this disaster day in and day out in Gaza. And by the way, the third remove is what's happening on the West Bank. And nobody was talking about the West Bank because they were talking about Gaza. Now nobody's talking about Gaza because they're talking about Iran, and we're losing sight of just how many bad things are happening. So it's a very complicated and complex moment. But what unites it, I think, across the board is a lack of foresight from this government. What is the plan for Israel to remain Jewish and democratic? What is going to be the long run for 7 million Palestinians who live between the river and the sea? What is the future of Gaza? What is the governance structure going to be? What's going to happen when you're done with the bombing in Iran and they start rebuilding again the nuclear program, but this time without any inspectors? So many of the things that get done seem to just have not thought through the third and the fourth step. And that's a unifying theme, I think, across a lot of these sectors.
So we've all been watching as the actions of Israel have resulted in rising anti-Israel sentiment here in this country, on college campuses, hatred everywhere, really, which has spilled over into anti-Semitism too, in some ways distinguishable and in some ways not. What do we do with all of this as American Jews, as Americans who have our democratic values deeply at the heart of who we see ourselves as citizens of this country, but also as Jews or people part of the Jewish community? how do we live with this arrangement where, without any power to affect the Israeli government, we're being blamed for the actions of the Israeli government?
Well, I think the starting point is that we really have to make sure we as American Jews help people to distinguish between criticism of the policies and actions of the government of Israel and anti-Semitism. Not every criticism of what Netanyahu is doing, you've certainly heard a bunch already up here. This is not anti-Semitism. And there is a very vibrant pro-Palestinian political movement that is pointing out the things that are happening that are not good for Palestinians and are speaking out on behalf of Palestinian rights. And doing that is not inherently anti-Semitic. And so I think one thing the American Jewish community has to play a role in is helping people to understand the distinction between criticism of Israel and its policies and its actions versus what is a very, very deep-rooted, troubling anti-Semitic stream on both the right and the left. And we have to stand up and fight that. And we need the assistance of other communities for that. We need the assistance of government. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to fight anti-Semitism, but we're going to need partners. And so that means recognizing other people's hate and other people's pain. And anti-Semitism is one form of hate, but there is racism, and there is Islamophobia, and there is a whole array of other hatreds and bigotries and prejudices out there. And the Jewish community can stand with those communities against other forms of hatred, and we will have a lot more partnership then when we take on anti-Semitism against us. And so those are, a few of the things that I think we need to do as a community.
Who do you think our best partners are in fighting this rising tide of hatred, which seems to be sweeping the country?
Well, I do think that the key partners are other communities that understand prejudice and hate and bigotry. I think there are through lines on some of the hatreds, particularly from the white nationalist movements, some of the more extreme right of center movements. There are through lines between racism and anti-immigration sentiment and anti-Semitism. It's a fear of the other that's being drummed up by folks who have political agendas. And being good partners, being in solidarity, I think it's really important for us to show up for those communities, and then they need to show up for us. I think that was one of the disappointments for us after October 7th, was this sense of where were some of our partners. But I think that, we also have to show up for them. And so I think it's a two-way street, but I think it's absolutely critical that we be building the bridges with other communities right now that are in danger. I want to also highlight that this administration is using the fight against anti-Semitism as a cover for its political agenda. And so when it attacks higher education and defunds universities and claims that it's because the universities aren't doing enough on anti-Semitism, what they're really doing is fulfilling a long-standing conservative MAGA priority, which is to defund higher education. When they deport students and they say we're not going to allow foreign student visas anymore at universities, that isn't as much because of the anti-Semitism, it's because they don't want foreign students in our universities anymore. They are undercutting the First Amendment, they're undercutting due process, the Constitution. All of these are long-standing MAGA conservative agenda items, and the fight against anti-Semitism is being used as a cover, and the Jewish community needs to call that out as well and stand up for higher education, stand up for immigrants, stand up for the First Amendment and for due process.
If I could just add on that, I think it's really important from the Israeli point of view, and I guess this is could be helpful for American Jews as well, is to distinguish the the Israeli people from our government, and just like the Americans want, President Trump does not represent all of Americans, but the U.S. is so strong, is such a superpower that I think it can survive one or 8 years of a bad government in its image, in its world image. What's happening to Israel's image? Well, we can discuss that. Well, at least from what's happening to Israel's image in the past 19 months is here to stay. And it's all around. I mean, if you go to music festivals today, which seem to be like we're supposed to be the most peaceful places, then every big music festival today has Free Palestine, Stop the Genocide, and these are younger generations that are growing old on a totally different image of Israel that I grew up on, or people here grew up on, and it's important in that respect, in my opinion, to keep the conversation nuanced as possible and to keep on talking in order to keep informed as possible, and just to distinguish again between the Israeli people and the Israeli government. And that being said, I don't think that even the next Israeli government will necessarily explore policies that will make it easier for American Jews. It's important also to know, the basics is that while a majority of American Jews are Democrat, a majority of Israelis consider themselves right-wing or define themselves right-wing or center right-wing, meaning that any government, these will be the policies that it will explore, which means we need to continue the discussion and keep it a nuanced discussion even more, because in order to keep the connections and to keep everyone safe in this environment.
So what do you think will happen going forward with the Israeli government? What are possible changes that might be ahead, or will this stay?
So I'm very careful not to give any prophecies, especially not on the record, so nobody here. But I think it's safe to say that the elections, which were supposed to be in October 2026, will be earlier than that. After, again, we have to see how this rolls out in Iran. But if it rolls out successfully for Netanyahu, he will have an incentive to dissolve the Knesset and go to a quick election as quick as possible, meaning that we could see an election happen somewhere between November 25 to February 2026. And that's a lot of time till then, but at least it seems like Netanyahu has improved his starting point dramatically after this attack. And even before this attack, he wasn't in such a bad situation. It's true that he seems far away from the 61 majority he needs in order to form a government, but it's actually not the number he needs. He actually needs much less than that he only needs to prevent another government from being established. So I won't go into the numbers, but essentially Netanyahu can only, if he has 50 seats, the chances of anyone else forming a government are very, very low, because the other 70 are left and right and Arabs and Jews, and we already saw that there was one experiment with that and it didn't work, or at least it worked but collapsed after a year. And after October 7th, the prospects of having an Arab cooperation as an active member of the government are dramatically lower. The Israeli public after October 7th is much less tolerant to the Arabs at large, to the Palestinians. So Netanyahu basically is in a very good situation at the moment. And it also helps that, none of his opponents really pose a real alternative to him on any issue, basically. Even on the war, it took a while till the center-left leaders started to really call out Netanyahu and present an alternative on it. On Iran, now we can basically see all of the opposition leaders, they are helping Netanyahu at the moment. They are all giving interviews to international media outlets, trying to present the war against Iran as a consensus war and so basically there isn't a real strong alternative to Netanyahu. Just connecting that to what you talked about about the Israeli government that has been basically an Israeli government that has been running away from a strategic thought. None of his opponents are actually doing much of that either. So whenever we talk about Netanyahu's success, which again, it's always seems such a phenomena that he's like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Every time we say it's the end of the Netanyahu era, here it comes again. There's always a significant part of that is how his opponents just fail to present an alternative, a viable alternative, and are afraid to even challenge most of his positions on Iran, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on many, many issues.
So a lot of us here in the American Jewish community feel really helpless. We can't seem to figure out how to make a difference, given the government in Israel and the government here, and it's not the way we would like to see things. What advice would you give us? What would you charge us with? What can we do to be involved in this and to affect some change in a direction that we can live with, so that we have an Israel that we can support, that we can live with, that we can love?
So, I mean, I would say there are three key things, and all are things that J Street is very actively involved in. The first thing is that we are Americans first. And the crucial question is, what is American policy towards Israel? And the approach that the American Jewish community has taken over the course of many decades is there's only one way to be pro-Israel, and that's to support whatever it is that the government of Israel is doing. And J Street came along, and it came along with the proposition that actually you can really love Israel and care deeply about the country and the people and its future, and disagree deeply with the policies and the actions of the government, which I think a very large percentage of Jewish America does when it comes to Netanyahu, and it comes to the Gaza war, and it comes to the occupation, and it comes to all the things that are going in the wrong direction with Israel's democracy. They're just a never-ending list of things that many of us in the Jewish community believe are going wrong. So American policy shouldn't be to just give a blank check and a pass for everything that Israel does. And I think the first thing that we can do as Americans is lobby and be engaged in this policy-making process of the United States so that the people making decisions in Washington understand what we really think. They misunderstand what our views are and the diversity of views within our community, because for so long they've only heard from one set of voices that are very loud and dominate the conversation. So that's the first thing we can do, is make our own voice heard about American politics and policy. The second thing is that within our American Jewish community, we don't allow a breadth of discussion and a debate and dissent, and we don't hear enough alternative voices. And the way that our community functions, whether it's in Hillels on college campuses, or it's within synagogues, or it's in federations, or it's Jewish communal organizations, too often the tent is defined very, very narrowly. And people who have legitimate points of view are not allowed to participate. And that is unhealthy for our community. And I think particularly for young people, the idea that they can't question what's going on and they can't criticize what's going on without being told you're no longer part of the family, you're no longer part of the community, that's not very healthy for our Jewish community. So a second thing that we can do as an American Jewish community is say it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have an argument. I hate to break it to folks, but Jews are an argumentative people. And we actually like to have debates and discussions within our community. And that actually would be great for the community. It's healthy to have a debate and a dialogue. My opinion is one opinion. People disagree with me. That's really good. And so that's the second thing I think we can do, and it's healthy for the process of making American policy, but it's really healthy for the future of the American Jewish community. And if we constrain our community, we're constraining our future. Those are two things.
Yeah, what happened to the third?
I felt I was talking too long. We've done this now a couple of times today, and I feel like I talked too much, so I left the third one to you.
You can add afterwards. We didn't get a chance because we have so much more important stuff, but we didn't get a chance to talk about what has happened to Israeli democracy in the past 2.5 years since this government was established, and what is the outlook for Israeli democracy given the Israeli demographics, right? So I feel like, as a liberal Jew who is at this point very close to being a minority in Israeli society, if not already, liberal secular Jews are going to be a minority in 20 years if they're not already now. And in order to keep Israel a liberal democracy, you need to keep the liberal Israeli Jews strong, and for that we need help from our cousins in American Jewry. I mean, when you think about the Jewish people, and then we are not in a minority, but when you think about the Jewish state, we are in a minority. But the dream of the Jewish people is to have a liberal democracy, and Zionism is about having a liberal democracy. So I think this should be a joint project, and it's really important to keep the connections and to keep talking and to keep the conversation going and to understand the nuances and to understand like how things look different from different point of views and how things feel. But I feel that for the Israeli liberal Democrats, we really need that back. We really need the back of American Jewry, and it makes us feel, I think, a bit less alone in a very scary world. And I really think it's crucial to keep that connection through organizations like J Street or other, but really to emphasize the liberal parts of Israeli society and democracy, because we are a minority and we're also experiencing a dramatic immigration abroad. I mean, there are people leaving Israel, liberals and whoever basically who can get relocated is looking to get relocated, meaning that the prospect is that a lot of the liberal Jews are going to be abroad. So there has to be a stronger connection between the liberal Jews in Israel and the liberal Jews abroad in order to keep Israel a liberal democracy.
So I want to follow up on that, because I've heard a lot of people in our community here say, Israel no longer represents me. It's not the country that I believe in, or I don't know if I want to remain connected. So what do you say to those people?
So those are questions we ask ourselves every day, Israelis as well. I have friends who have left the country because they don't feel that Israel represents them anymore. But the easy answer is to say if we give up, it definitely won't represent us anymore. So we need to continue to fight to keep it what it is. And it might reach a point of no return when I'll say there's no reason to fight anymore. But I do still think that Israel is still a beacon of creativity and of, Israel, despite the past horrible 3 years, Israel has done amazing things to the world, and I would wish to keep that going on, and I think that can go on only if we keep the liberal democracy beating. So we have to continue fighting, and I mean, giving up is definitely not going to help us preserve Israel as it is.
And I think I would just build on that there is, you said the word, it doesn't represent us. And I don't think that Jews who don't live there don't need to be represented by Israel, but Jews who don't live there are going to be affected by what happens in Israel no matter whether they like it or not. And so it is crucial to be involved in these issues and to make it clear where we stand. What are our morals? What are our values? What are the things that we consider to be the right path for the Jewish people? Because if the state of the Jewish people is going off in one direction, it's going to come back to us here. And I think we see that in some of the anger over what's happening in Gaza and what's happening on the West Bank. And it's really important that we be able to say, no, we object to this too. We have a set of morals, we have a set of politics, we have a set of values, and it doesn't represent us. And we as an American Jewish community, and the majority of American Jews, hold this set of values. And I think it's very important, and disconnecting and walking away is not going to be the right response, as if Israel continues to move in a Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich direction, if it eventually annexes, if it eventually has 15 million people but doesn't provide everybody with equal rights, it's really going to be important for American Jews to speak out and say that isn't representing us, and that is not who we are.
So before we go to a few questions from the audience, I just want to ask you, I know we don't have a crystal ball, any of us. I wish we did. Dream big. What could this look like when we come out of this mess? What is a wonderful scenario, not just a wonderful, but a realistic scenario for how we might be able to have an Israel that really represents us, that is a peaceful place and surrounded by peaceful neighbors? What could we hope for?
You're like going. I was just going. I have a small. I mean, I do hope that at the end of this war, something good can happen to the region, in the region, and sometimes we don't expect some of these things. Sometimes it's like a butterfly effect. I'll just say, when the beeper operation started in September, then I was very skeptical of it. And I was like, why do we have to start another war in Lebanon? And we're just going to get dragged into another war in Lebanon. I have the trauma of the previous, the first Lebanon war, which basically went on for 18 years. But then a few months ago, 2 months ago, I was in a conference with people from all around the Middle East. And I met 2 people from Lebanon. It was the first time I met actual people from Lebanon. And they were briefing what's happening in Lebanon right now. And they were describing a country in an amazing renaissance, going through a democratic reform, going through internal reforms, because Hezbollah is weakened. They have a new government. They have a parliament in which can legislate anti-corruption bills. And they wouldn't say that it's because they wouldn't thank Israel, but it wouldn't have happened without Israel's operation in Lebanon. So I don't buy Netanyahu's dreams about regime change in Iran, but I do hope that at the end of this, there can be a regional status quo, a new regional status quo that can bring us closer to peace. The plan is on the table. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows the parameters. It's the Netanyahu will call it peace and stability. J Street will call it the 23-state solution. Donald Trump will call it the Nobel Prize, his trip to the Nobel Prize, but it's there. It just entails in Netanyahu to end the war, and you can start a new era of prosperity in the Middle East with a new expanded Abraham Accords. And just on that, the Abraham Accords, even though they were done by the same Netanyahu and Donald Trump, were a good thing to the region. They were a good thing for the Middle East. So I'll start where I ended. It's complicated. Sometimes it's these people who we think they're very bad in anything else they do, they might be the only people that could bring some peace to the region.
Okay.
That's a provocation.
I like that. That's a lot to think about.
Yep.
Maybe a new Lebanon, maybe a Gaza Riviera that is actually good for the people of Gaza in some way, and it changed Middle East. We'll see. What do you think?
No, it's exactly where I go. Is the Arab world for decades and decades and decades wanted nothing other than to drive Israel into the sea. And we all grew up knowing the no's, no to peace, no to Israel, no to negotiations. It was the concept that we worked in. And that held for 40, 50 years of Israel's life. It's the exact opposite today. The Arab world wants yes, yes, yes. The Sunni Arab world wants to have peace with Israel. It wants to recognize it. It wants to have relationships. It wants to have a deep security relationship. It wants to have an economic relationship. This is a milestone. It's history waiting to be made. And all we need is a change in this government. That is the one thing I'm asking of you, Tal. We need a change of this government, because Donald Trump can be part of this equation. He wants this deal as badly as anybody. The Arab world wants this deal. 60 to 70% of the Israeli public wants this deal. It has to include a Palestinian state within it. But it's in partnership with the Arab world building that state, as opposed to using the Palestinians as pawns to, continue their, dominance of their own people or to just, play geopolitics. They actually need to be partners in developing this Palestinian state. So there is this glimmer of hope on the horizon, but we do need a different government of Israel.
On both sides. We also probably need a different government in Palestine as well. But
Yes,
we'll
and that's exactly true as well. But that's part of the process. There has to be a whole regime change, in terms of Palestinian leadership as well.
So where do we get this new leadership?
Well, the new leadership in Israel, I actually don't think that all you need is somebody other than Netanyahu. I don't.
Anybody.
No, seriously. But anybody just slightly to his center, right? I'm not saying it has to be a left government. There'll never be a left government in my lifetime, most likely. But a center-right government that is putting the national interest first can make this deal. And that's not an unrealistic place to get.
I'm just going to provoke with another thought because I'm having fun at it. But Netanyahu has two goals that he wants to put on his legacy, right? We always talk about how Netanyahu's legacy, because he's the son of a historian, so it's really important how his legacy. And of course, the 7th of October is something he doesn't want on his legacy. But the two other things that he talks about always are two: Iran and Saudi Arabia. And he has been saying in the past few years that if he gets Saudi Arabia and Iran, then he can retire. I'm just saying, it could very well be that Netanyahu will also, we don't have to wait for another government, yes, but it could be Netanyahu who will be doing this and running on it for his next campaign as well, running on that kind of platform for his next
Inshallah.
campaign. Inshallah.
So what would this new Iran look like, do you think? Or what it would, if there's going to be a new partner for peace, maybe?
But it's not Iran. The partner is the Sunni Arab world led by Saudi Arabia. Part of what brings everybody together is their desire to create a bit of a counterweight to Iran. So Iran actually is a catalyst that brings people together in the 23 states, which are the Sunni Arab states, including Palestine and Israel. That's the 23. And Iran, ultimately, I hope that there can one day be a rapprochement, and I think some of the Sunni states would like that as well. But part of the strategic alignment here is that it's a lineup against the Iranian malign activities of the last several decades.
Keeping Iran in check.
Right.
So there's a question: what is the current state of the Israeli media environment?
I'll let you take that one.
Well, the Israeli media environment is still free. It is free. It's very much, it's not necessarily trustworthy, but I'm not sure that's new. But as in other places, and as it's very similar to what's happening here. Any liberal, critical, or even real newspaper, they don't have to be liberal, but any news outlet that actually does its job and does the news and looks for news about the government or is critical of the government is automatically tagged and dubbed as an enemy of the state. Netanyahu has waged a campaign against senior journalists in Israel. The media is very much biased to the right after 15 years of Netanyahu. He has his own channel, which is Channel 14. It's like the equivalent of Fox News, but the previous Fox News, the Tucker Carlson Fox News, meaning it's basically that's where Netanyahu's electoral base get their news, and it's full of conspiracy theories and rabbit holes that if you start going down to, you get to Jeffrey Epstein every time.
He's responsible for everything?
It's not George Soros, it's Jeffrey Epstein. Every story at the end gets to Jeffrey Epstein. But also the mainstream media, because of the competition with Channel 14, They also always have a representation for I wouldn't say even a right-wing position, because it's not about being right-wing, it's about being pro-Netanyahu or pro-government. And there's freedom of expression, but if you say something that's too leftist, then immediately you will have petitions from the right calling to fire you. And it doesn't happen the same way if you say something controversial from the right. So it's complicated. It's still free, but it's complicated. I think that there's also, Netanyahu is now, it's important to say, it's so similar. It's just like parallel universes. So Netanyahu is basically trying to close down or cut down the budget of the Israeli Public Broadcast Association. And he has several bills currently in the making that are supposed to make his channel's life much easier from regulatory aspect and make the other channels' lives much more difficult. We, for instance, don't have any access to Netanyahu anymore as political reporters and diplomatic reporters. We used to have even he doesn't give interviews. He only gives interviews to Channel 14. He hardly gives press conferences. Now he has a new invention, which is press conferences in which you send him the questions from afar, but the journalist is not physically in the room. So we don't have a lot of access, and he doesn't really care anymore. He's just speaking to his choir on Channel 14. If that sounds familiar.
A little, yeah. Another question, does bombing Iran motivate those folks more to develop a nuclear weapon?
I mean, that is one of the big unknowns, and it's one of the arguments against doing it. You can set back Iran's nuclear program by a certain period of time. Maybe it's months, maybe it's even a couple of years, by destroying some buildings and facilities, killing some scientists. But you rebuild the buildings, the scientists have understudies, the knowledge is there, the uranium is there. It will not take that long, and it won't be any longer under international supervision, because Iran will now have kicked out the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and there will be no more inspectors, and there won't be any guardrails. And so that's been an argument on the pro-diplomacy side against taking preemptive military action, is it may well lead to a race to the bomb that Iran, it appears, wasn't engaged in the first place. And so maybe this makes it more likely than less likely that Iran gets eventually to a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think Netanyahu appears to neglect Israel's international image, particularly vis-a-vis the Gaza war? Why is he so unconcerned?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, Netanyahu is basically neglecting everything besides his own political survival. It's even, I mean, the negligence in the international image is so huge. I mean, it's not necessarily about hasbara or how you sell it, but it's about the policy. But even selling it, we are 19 months into this war. The Israeli Prime Minister does not have an official foreign media spokesperson. There's no one go-to official person, and we used to have, this is a post that was in the past, Mark Regev did it. There is no official spokesperson to the Israeli government to speak to the foreign media. There have been a special, after the 7th of October, they kind of brought a lot of volunteers in to help with the messaging abroad. Basically, that has been dismantled. And the whole issue of how Israel is explained abroad has just been neglected, such as other things that have been neglected under this government. I think, Netanyahu lives in a total echo chamber today. He's at that point where he is just surrounded by people who just say yes, 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 yes. They don't necessarily show what's going on in the world. If they show him what's going on in the world, it's on Fox News and on Newsmax and on the news shows, Mark Levin or any one of the podcasters that his son likes so much. So I think that he's disconnected and he feels like he's enough, but that's kind of old-fashioned to think that he's enough. And I think he just doesn't care, basically.
And I do think in that echo chamber, in that bubble, and it happens in the right, political right in the States as well, in the Jewish community, any criticism in the international community is dismissed as anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter what they're saying because they all hate us anyway. And I think that just gets into the bloodstream, and therefore you just disregard it. And it may be just a objective international assessment that what you're doing doesn't make any sense, but it's anti-Semitism if it's, critical.
We also live in an era, and this connects to a lot of things we've been talking about and connects both to Netanyahu and Trump. We live in an era in which, the truth doesn't really matter to them, to these kind of leaders. So, as long as they can sell an alternative truth to their followers, and that's an alternative truth that those followers will believe, that their electoral base will believe, they actually don't care what happens in the real reality or the alternative reality, because they're selling a truth to their followers. So I think that's part of the issue as well. They can tell on Channel 14, the chant will be that everyone hates us, just like you said. No, there will be no retrospective or introspective of what we have been doing, and does it have anything to do with us, because we can always blame the others and we can always play ourselves victim in this echo chamber.
A lot of alternative facts floating around out there. One last question, Shumid, are we okay on the time? Okay. Do most Israelis support the expansion of the settlements? Can we talk a little bit about the West Bank, and it's gotten lost in the drama of the other reports, as both of you said. What's going on there?
That's a good question. I think that I don't have an exact data on that. It's interesting if it's been polled. I don't think a majority of Israelis support the expansion of settlements. I think a majority of Israelis just don't care about, they're indifferent to the expansion of the settlements, so that's why the settlements are expanded. So I think if you would go to the polls and ask, do you think the settlement should be expanded, then they might have said no, but there's no question like that. And the West Bank is basically the backyard. Nobody's looking there for years. I mean, if you live in Tel Aviv or in Haifa or in Beersheba, you can go throughout your whole life without going to the West Bank, seeing what's happening there, whether if it's settlement expansion or depriving Palestinians of their rights and lands. Israelis just don't see it, and they are indifferent to it. And here comes in the leadership. They also haven't had any leaders who have, or Netanyahu and his government do not have any opposition making that an issue, because the notion amongst the center-left leaders is always, well, if everyone's going to the right, we have to go to the right, so we won't deal with the settlements, and we won't challenge the settlements. Even so, some of the center-left, Benny Gantz, for instance, embraces the settlements. So most Israelis don't look there, and their leaders are not pointing them to look there as well.
And I just don't think people in Israel know what's happening there. Like, the settlements is a very benign word. It has no valence to it. It doesn't tell you anything. There is a occupation of another people that doesn't have rights, and they are being driven off their land, and they're being subjected to settler violence, and there is a whole regime of essentially state-sponsored terror that people live under. And Israelis have no idea whatsoever. And for most American Jews who go to visit Israel, you fly into Ben Gurion, You go to your hotel on the beach, you visit your family and have a wonderful meal at a great restaurant, take in the opera, go to the museum, get back to Ben Gurion and get on your plane. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful country. There's a lot of great culture. There's so much going on. You have lots of friends and family. That's all great. But who goes the 10 miles to the west, to the east, and actually experiences what is happening over there? And people are shocked. When I take folks, and I do this frequently, take people who have never been, who have known Israel their entire lives, 50, 60, 70 years of knowing the country and thinking they deeply understand the place, and then they see what's been happening on the West Bank, they're in shock. Well, Israelis, it's the exact same thing. They have even less idea than many Americans, because at least Americans read the New York Times and find out a little bit about what's going on, but there's no exposure whatsoever of what's going on over there. So that's the shocking thing. They probably don't have an opinion on the question and don't even really understand what the question, why you're even asking the question in the first place.
I just want to add something onto that. You know, the 7th of October was a collapse of a lot of conceptions. And one of the conceptions that collapsed on the 7th of October is Netanyahu's strategy of weakening the Palestinian Authority and strengthening Hamas, trying to divide and conquer the Palestinian people. And one would expect that the collapse of that strategy would lead to a wake-up call to try and say, wait, we have been strengthening the most extreme parts of the Palestinian society instead of cooperating with those who we already cooperate in the West Bank. And it would be, if Israel would have, if the Israeli center-left would have any real leaders, that would be one of the things they would be pointing to in the aftermath of October 7th, saying, wait, it's true, but that collapsed, but the Palestinian Authority is a partner we have been holding security relationship, a close security relationship with for over 20 years, and that works. So we should take that model and put it in Gaza. But we didn't have any one of the opposition leaders come out and say that, and at the end of the day, we're back at the same situation in which we're ending another round of war in Gaza with Hamas still in power, and the Palestinian Authority still weakened, and no one is changing that kind of concept, even though we already learned and saw that that concept collapsed. So just to connect.
I want to close with a comment, which is also a question, I guess. I mean, we've spent the last hour and 15 minutes talking about all manner of problems and wars and challenges that we're facing at this moment. And yet, I feel much more hopeful than I did when we walked into this room, because I feel like all of the challenges that you've given to us to think about really are about connecting with Israel and being present and standing up for Israel in this really difficult time in history. So I guess it's a comment, but it's also a question. You're not giving up? Question mark. You have tremendous dedication and hope, both of you, in your work for a different future. How?
I'm basically a weather Zionist. I love the weather in Israel. I don't think there's any other place in the world that has such good weather, so I need to fight so I can spend my life in this great weather for the rest of my life. And
LA is very nice too, but okay.
yeah, but it's closer to, it's not the, I think the food might be better in Israel.
Sunshine, sunscreen and sunshine, okay.
Well, I guess, I mean, mine may be slightly deeper. Nothing personal. You know, I think that there is a 5,000-year history, 4,000-year history of a Jewish people at stake. This isn't just about policy. This isn't just about politics. This is what it means to be a Jew. This is a fight, I think, over the soul of the Jewish people and what the legacy is we leave to our kids and grandkids about what it means to be Jewish. And, you know, I can't give up on that. You know, we have an incredible moral code. We have an incredible history. We have an incredible legacy that we've helped shape a lot of the world's religions and philosophies about what's right and wrong. And yet, the state of the people that came up with the idea that you don't treat other people the way you don't want to be treated yourself, right? And that's the whole of the Torah. And somehow we're treating other people the way we don't want to be treated ourselves. We have to fight for this if we really believe in our legacy and who we are as a people. It's incredibly important to stand up for these values and to fight for them. And at the same time, the weather's great, so it's really important to both stand up for your values and have sunny, warm temperatures for probably 9 to 10 months out of the year.
Well, some of you may know Rabbi Jessica Krishner. She was here a number of years ago, and she said this congregation and the conversation that we've been having tonight, takes place between these two windows, between our famous Moses window that tells, I like to say, the true story of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments under Half Dome in Yosemite on this side, and our prophet window over here, which instructs us, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, and perhaps is a scene from Dolores Park in San Francisco. We're not exactly sure. But in between these words of Torah and the words of our prophets are the living beings trying to exist within these words and with these words and to carry them on after thousands of years of trying to figure out what that means for us as a people and for us in a larger world. Enormous thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. This was so, so hopeful.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jeremy and Tal. Let's give them another round of thank you. Tal, I think I'm also a weather Zionist, by the way. You gave me a new term to think about. I just want to say that I started, it was a very rough weekend for me. I barely slept, and being here with you in a community is so impactful, and I'm so grateful for all of you for coming here and showing the strengths of our community to get through things together and work together for our future. And before we leave, I just want to say that if you are inspired by what Jeremy and Tal said, we are very welcome to join our movement if you haven't yet. We have lots of ways to get engaged. If you see the little postcard that you have on your seats, you can scan the QR code and then find different ways to mark different ways that you can get engaged with us. And there's a lot of different ways that can talk to each and every one of you. If it's advocacy work to make an impact on your local Congress member, or supporting your as a political candidates and believe in our values of democracy and peace, or working in the community to create impact in the community, or amplifying our voice nationally at our upcoming national convention in DC in February, and also sustaining our movement by supporting our work. And this is an opportunity to thank all of you who support us already or here in the crowd. We're greatly, greatly thankful for your support and partnership in this work. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And I hope you came out a little more hopeful, or at least encouraged to keep doing and work for a better future for everyone. Toda rabba, laila tov. Thank you so much.